All right, let's finish with Mr. Ratzel and the German school. Again, German school says living, breathing thing, need Lebensraum, living space. Not necessarily a bad theory, of course, until you look at the bottom, and it was picked up by the Nazis. And that's what Hitler and the Nazis used to justify their expansion of Germany, that it needed Lebensraum. And so the German school obviously fell quite out of favor. What was picked up by then was what's called the British American School. And that one, the one you're most familiar with, is the theory that was put forth by Halford Mackinder, British political geographer. And he comes up with what's called the Heartland Theory. Right? Theory had always been that whoever controlled the seas controlled the world. And that was true for a very long time. The Spanish and the British were known for their naval power, and they were able to conquer great areas of the world by virtue of that naval power. But what Mackinder was suggesting was that it's not naval power, it's land power, and that you need to control certain areas that were filled with resources. In the area that we're seeing here in the red, the Heartland area, that's why it's called the Heartland Theory. Right? You have part of Eastern Europe, in particular the Ukraine, and areas that produce a lot of agricultural goods, right? Because you need to eat, and the people that you want need to eat. There's also a bunch of raw materials like coal and oil, right, in order to run the machinery of such a deal. It says if you control this land area, right, then you can control areas around it as well. And that would be partly the rim land. And look at that area that's in the blue, that rim land. All of Europe, the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, India, China, right, with their particular areas of resources as well. Oil, much more oil, as well as other agricultural goods as well. And these areas all border along the sea. So you can incorporate some naval power as well. Part of why there was this theory called containment theory, that we had to contain the Soviet Union, contain communism, was because of this rimland theory, that the rimland here, right, could easily be taken over by the group here, which was the Soviet Union that controlled this area, and that they could then expand. And so we had to control and contain, and that became really the basis for a lot of the United States military policy, was the theory of containment. It's why we went to Vietnam. It's why we made a presence for NATO in Western Europe, was to make that kind of containment as well. All right. Moving along. All right, we've talked about centripetal and centrifugal, or centrifugal. I don't know how to pronounce it. I think I've learned lately that I've been pronouncing it wrong for years. Those particular theories, and there's a nice little chart there that tells you what those are. Centrifugal theory says, or forces are ones that divide a state, pull it apart. If you think of a centrifuge, right? Centrifuge separates things. That's what these forces do. And why there are some that are very obvious on there: ethnic conflict, social injustice, poverty, bad government. There's a lot of other ways that can do it that are a little more subtle, right? If you look at the issues that are at play with the province of Quebec in Canada, right? It's this area that believes that they are more related to the French than they are to Canada, and Quebec has tried on occasions to secede from Canada, right? So language can be a force that pulls people apart. Religion is already on there. So things that are maybe not so subtle, or so not so obvious, can also be subtle forces. Centripetal forces hold a state together, right? Pull it together. And those can be the same things that pull it apart, right? Ethnic unity can be something that keeps things apart, or pulls things together. Language, right? France has worked very hard to make sure that French is the national language. Indonesia is a country that is very fragmented and spread across, but they have an awful lot of systems within their school, right, to indoctrinate people that you are Indonesian as opposed to like an island resident. So things like religious acceptance, nationalism, heritage, language, other things can keep people together. And that may be something that would make for a great discussion on a free response question, right? Is to be able to understand our world a bit better. What is it that pulls people together and pushes them apart? And you can see how a question like that would pull in so much of what we've studied over the years. You can talk about language, you can talk about food security, you can talk about government, you can talk about infrastructure, all kinds of things that might pull a great question, for a free response question. All right, let's talk about electoral politics. And those are great questions too, what we've got going on right now. Electoral politics are how do we elect, right? How do we deal with the people that live here and the representation that they have in whatever form of government that every state might have. We talk about the census, right? The census tells us where, not only how many people live here, but where they are living, right? Once we decide where people are living, where they have moved to, migrated, then we will reapportion our population, right? So Texas will probably gain population, while California may be losing population, because we know there are a lot of California companies that have relocated to Texas. We also know about the internal migration of people from the north and the northeast, right? Particularly older people who don't want to live in the cold, right? Moving to the south, the southwest. Also people who are moving for jobs as the northeast industrial complex is shut down a bit, or at least lost some jobs, that people are moving to the south and the southwest where they're finding other jobs in all kinds of industry, the oil industry, the tech industries as well. Once the population's been reapportioned to whatever state that they're in, then we're going to have to redistrict, right? And redistrict means to split up, right, the population so that we have an equal number of population in each district. So if Texas gets 50 representatives, and I know that's not true, but if they get 50 representatives, then how do we divide up the state of Texas so that we have districts that are equal, that there are every person, let's say every representative represents 100,000 people, right? So we want to make sure that those are equal. The problem comes into the issue, of course, of gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is redistricting for advantage. And if you look at the chart that you have up here, here is a district of 50 people, right? And I don't red, blue, I can't keep it straight. It doesn't matter anyway, but let's say 60 people like the color blue and 40 people like the color red. To divide them up equally, right, would be to have one district of each, have 5 districts, 3 of blue and 2 of red. In this case, of course, blue would be the majority, and that's not inconsistent with our form of government, because there are more blues than there are reds. If you divide it up this way, right, it keeps it very compact, very nice and clean, right? We don't get some funky looking district, but the way we choose to divide this up is not really fair, because in every district you have more blues than reds, and so what happens is that you get no red representation. Think about this in terms of minority-majority districts, where you have you might have a minority, in this case the red, right, who can never get anyone elected because they are always being outvoted by the majority. Right, so this would be an unfair way of splitting up a district. If you wanted to, put party representation here, that could happen too. As we know that after reapportionment happens and redistricting starts. Redistricting is put in the hands of the state legislature, and the state legislature in most states is run by a party, by party affiliation. So whoever is in power may try to do something like this, right, in order to make sure that they are the ones that are getting reelected and that the other party never has that opportunity. Same thing here, right? If you get the minority party somehow comes to power and they want to ensure that they always win, right? Then you have these funky looking districts where you have an equal number of people, but you spread them out so much that it makes it impossible for the other party to get to ever win, because you have packed the districts with people from your same group, affiliation, or ethnic group. You can see some of the pictures down here, what some real live districts look like. Here, this would be a lovely compact district, but you have all of this stuff that's sticking out. And you can see even people in the district aren't even connected, right? They may be separated in some way from the rest of the people in their district. You can see the lengths that some people will go to try and create a district that ensures that they will get reelected. But how is it that people on one end have the same interest necessarily as the people at another end? Things like hospitals and schools and parks may not carry the same weight or have the same needs in one end of a district or another. And for a real life district, back in the 1990s, look at Florida's 3rd congressional district. So this would be to a House of Representatives in Florida. Here's a lovely district, a big district. Here's a nice district. Here's a big one. And then there's District 3. And who the heck knows what that is? It goes all the way around because somebody wanted to get reelected. Right, so electoral politics are certainly an issue. Voting rights are an issue. Taking away polling places, taking away voter registration, making it more difficult to register, requiring IDs, can all be ways that people try to manipulate the system for their particular benefit. All right. And then the last one is geopolitics. And geopolitics is kind of a weird thing. And I found this nice definition, right? Geopolitics talks about why some countries have power and others don't. And this is, again, a lovely question, because you can talk about geography, having resources that other countries don't, right? Think of a country potentially in sub-Saharan Africa that's in a very arid climate that doesn't have great farmland, doesn't have great source of water, compared to the United States that has, great farmland, great water, a place that has oil and another country that doesn't. You can tie in colonialization, because some countries, got a head start and stockpiled all the wealth and they still get to have it. We can talk about representation in the United Nations, the Security Council that only has a certain number of members and they don't change. And they can basically veto resolutions that might help some poorer countries and veto them because they don't have they don't have the wealth and the power of the others, right? Geopolitics ties into ethnicity. It ties into race. How are certain countries treated if they don't look like, a white European? Do they somehow get shortchanged in, when it comes to sitting at the table? You may also want to talk about shatter belts. We talked a little bit about that, and that's like in the Baltic with the former Yugoslavia, right? Throwing people together, ethnicities together that don't get along really well. How can that prevent them from ever getting forward and getting power if they are constantly infighting? All right, I think that should cover it. I would highly recommend that you read the documents that I've provided for you under AP Review Documents before you take the quiz. If you have any questions, please send me an email. Thanks.